So you brought up Section 230. Has there been any updates on that? Now to again give everyone a very quick refresher, Section 230 is that piece of legislation that is misinterpreted by so many freaking people. And basically, what it does is it just assures people are mentioning how it shields social media companies from any type of responsibility. What they're missing is that, well, it doesn't just apply to social media companies. It applies to every user on the internet, and it applies to everything on the internet. So if you actually take the time to read it, which it's really not that long, you can see how, well, repealing this is not the answer, and it's not going to solve the problem you're trying to solve. It's actually going to make it worse, and we've seen that happen. Have there been any updates on that? I mean, I know there's been a few proposals out there that, again, will take us backwards. But what's going on right now in that space?
Yeah, totally. So, I mean, just to pile on to your excellent summary, I think we need to think of Section 230 as the law that allows for all user-generated content on the internet. So this video, your tweet that you just posted where you're like, Ron and Evan look funny, what your podcasts, your memes, your opinions, your jokes, all of that is only possible because of Section 230. And we think of it as a protection for corporations. And like, look, I get it. Like there's nothing in my DNA that is like excited about liability protection for corporations. My instinct is to say, fuck them. But really, it's a protection for users in the end, because without Section 230, every single website, every single online forum, every single video sharing site is going to be moderating content, not based on some kind of human rights framework or based on whatever their terms of service are, but based on whatever the most risk-averse lawyers in the world tell them may or may not get them sued, right? And so that means, for example, the videos that have been posted of police brutality that have been so essential in galvanizing the Black Lives Matter movement and the uprisings across the country, long overdue for racial justice. No website would want to host those videos in a world where they know that they could get endlessly sued by law enforcement, claiming that hosting those videos is a form of incitement. The Me Too movement is another great example where, finally, after, decades of, just rampant abuse within Hollywood and, many other industries, people have a platform to call it out and speak out about it. All of those posts could be, sued for defamation or for libel, et cetera. And if people were able to sue the platforms for hosting them, they would never host them in the first place, right? So we need to think of Section 230 not really as something that covers Facebook's butt, but something that allows all of us to have a voice. And the other thing is that people always forget the second part of it, which is that Section 230 is a sword and a shield. So it also allows platforms to moderate. So if you're someone who thinks that, platforms should be doing more to remove harmful content, if you were stoked that Twitter deplatformed Trump, Section 230 was part of what allowed them to do that. If you're on the other side and you think that platforms remove too much content and you would like to see them remove less, Section 230 is also your friend, because again, without Section 230, they would likely be moderating way more content, but not based on what's right or wrong, based on what's going to catch them a lawsuit. Right. So I think that's kind of the most important way to think about it, is that, Section 230 is not about, if you think there's too much censorship on the internet, repealing Section 230 doesn't fix that. If you think there's not enough moderation on the internet, Section 230 doesn't fix. Blowing up Section 230 doesn't fix that either. But what we do know is that it could have horrific consequences, particularly for marginalized communities. And that's what we saw with the last major change to Section 230, which was SESTA FOSTA, a bill that claimed to address sex trafficking, but in the end actually just ended up making Craigslist shut down their entire personal section, Tumblr shut down all adult content on their platform, and it had a devastating effect for many consensual sex workers who were using the internet as a place to operate much more safely than they could on the street. And it actually ended up sending a lot of folks back to the street because these platforms where they had found some semblance of safety and self-determination were being ripped away from them by this law that claimed to be protecting them. So we need to learn our lesson from that and make sure that Congress, if they're going to think about changing Section 230, we need to be very clear. Well, what is the problem you're actually trying to solve? And show me how this bill would fix it. Because so far, most of the proposals we've seen are basically like, I am mad at Facebook, and therefore I have introduced a bill that would blow up Wikipedia and Reddit. And like, none of that makes any sense. And, we need to demand policy that actually fixes problems, and I just think that's so important right now, because we might only get one shot at actually enacting policies that rein in the monopoly power of big tech companies and allow the internet to flourish as an engine for human rights and activism rather than an engine for greed and exploitation. And if Congress wastes it by passing some nonsense around Section 230, not only will that do a lot of harm, but they'll also wash their hands and say, see, we fixed the problems with the internet. Now we can all move on. And that does a disservice as well when there are real things that they should be doing, like passing strong federal data privacy legislation, finally, like reinstating net neutrality, like enforcing existing antitrust laws and breaking up some of these monopolies like Amazon and Facebook. So that's my 2 cents on that.
Well, and you kind of touched upon this, but I just want to reiterate it for everybody, watching and listening. Mark Zuckerberg himself has come out and he's okay with kind of messing with Section 230 now. Why do you think that is, folks? Well, that's because, as Evan mentioned, now anybody could face a lawsuit and anybody could be held liable if Section 230 goes away. So what Section 230 is actually doing, you're saying it's going to, quote, rein in Facebook. That's what you're told. In reality, it allows Facebook to maintain their power forever, because guess who can hold up against a lawsuit? Facebook. Guess who can't? Whatever's coming next.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And that's exactly why Zuckerberg has been pushing for this. And I think we're likely to see that from some of the other big companies soon, too, that they're going to say, look, let's make some changes to Section 230 that we can live with. And they're going to wipe out our competition. And look, we've got basically infinity money. We can purchase infinity lawyers, whereas smaller platforms, the Patreons, the Bandcamps, the Wikipedias of the world are never going to be able to compete. Another thing is that any changes to Section 230, especially that have to do with content moderation, would inherently prioritize more centralized platforms like Facebook, who do all of their moderation either through AI or through underpaid moderators, right? Whereas something like Wikipedia or even Discord or a more decentralized project like Signal is going to have a much harder time complying with those types of rules. So we might end up actually solidifying the monopoly power of the biggest, baddest companies and killing off these kind of alternative, more decentralized platforms, more community-minded platforms that could provide a better alternative in the future.
So we're talking about having policy that meets the moment, which, is sometimes kind of an overwhelming thing to wrap one's head around, because when you look at, especially when you look at our political landscape, and I really think in many ways, especially when I see someone like a Marjorie Taylor Greene, I think, wow, we really have two types of politicians who don't understand the internet and politicians who can't handle it. That's not a good that's not a good dichotomy to have. But what I think is the only real solid thing that we can really aim for at the end of the day, and I'd love to hear your take on this. I think it's just time for a real solid digital bill of rights that goes into closing the digital divide, that goes into net neutrality, that goes into how social media platforms are expected to behave and the laws they need to follow, that goes into antitrust and goes into all the above, and is a real solid digital bill of rights constructed by organizations like FIGHT, organizations, like digital rights organizations, along with, ACLU and lawyers. And that's what I think we need. I think anything less, we're still just, plugging holes in the Titanic as they come available, which they often do.
Yeah, totally. I mean, conceptually, I completely agree with you, right? Like we need to think about this comprehensively instead of just piecemeal. One challenge is just because of how broken our political system is, there are ways in which corporations are kind of almost using that or like pitting us against each other, right? Like one of the big talking points from AT&T lobbyists on net neutrality is they were like, why do you support net neutrality when it doesn't even apply to Facebook and Google? They don't have to be neutral. And then people like eat that up and they're like, yeah, I'm mad at Facebook and Google. Net neutrality must be bad, which is sort of like saying like,
which isn't even what net neutrality is.
Right.
That's not even what net neutrality is. They're just, they're making up what it is now.
Totally. Yeah. Or it's sort of like saying like, tobacco, right? Like the rules that say you can't sell cigarettes to kids don't apply to big oil. So let's get rid of them. Like that doesn't make any sense, right? We need both. We can walk and chew gum at the same time. So I think in the short term, I do think it's important that we kind of like keep clear what we're doing and why, right? We need to reinstate these net neutrality protections to address the monopoly power of companies like AT&T and Comcast. We need privacy legislation that protects us from companies like Facebook and Google. We need antitrust enforcement. And I think we do need to sort of like keep those, keep it clear, like which thing is doing what. But in the long term, I completely agree. Like we, more and more of our lives are moving online. And, the internet is like, it's almost silly to think of it as the internet anymore. Like it's just part of life in a way. And so like, I do think we need to think holistically and comprehensively. And as always, we need to make sure that we're not kind of relying only on laws, right? We should not trust governments, any government, our government, any other government, to even follow the rules that get put in place, especially in a moment of crisis or, when shit really hits the fan. And so we also always need to be thinking about technological solutions. And that's why, I'm not like a huge like cryptocurrency nerd and I wish I had more of it and had gotten more of it back in the day. But I do think that decentralized projects, blockchain projects, decentralized technology is interesting, and we should be like paying attention to it and considering the potential liberatory, capacity of it to replace these centralized behemoths that we know are kind of incompatible with, the values that we all hold. And so, I don't think it's like a magic silver bullet solution. I'm not going to be one of those people that be like, well, just use the blockchain, it would fix everything. But I do think it's important that we pay attention to, what are ways that we can create systems that are uncensorable or that are inherently resistant to surveillance built into the technology itself. And I think that that's exciting to me.
Yeah, I have a little bit of crypto. I'm learning some as we go. I had a crypto enthusiast on the show not too long ago to kind of unpack some of the basics, and so I learned a little more. I'm still not in a position where I will do a transaction by myself. I need to have my wife with me to there's a lot of numbers involved and it's very overwhelming and I need to have another person with me. My wife has done some on her own. She's I guess she's passed me up. She's confident. She's like, I can do it. But me, I'm like, no, it takes two. I need a second set of eyes.
That's smart. It's like the keys, the nuclear keys or something, right?
Yeah, totally. I'm just like, there's so many little numbers to punch in, and then you got to wait for it, and it's, yeah.
Get your news on with Ron. Don't you want to know what's going on? We're getting our news on today. Get your news on with Ron. Don't you want to know what's going on? We're getting our news on today. An article at Ron Placone. We'll go through it together and make it our own. Get your